I think a really funny thing happened when we first came in. Is you guys all kind of met each other and you said, physics, physics, physics. Oh, thank goodness it's all hard science, no fake science like biology. Do you care to justify that, Mr. Mikan?
Is this on?
It is, yeah, I'm afraid so.
No, it's science. It's just kind of soft. You know, like when you look for data, you got to do a lot of calculations. The variables are enormous. It's really hard to control them all. Whereas in physics and chemistry, you put so much in a beaker, stir it with water for 20 minutes, put a thermometer in it, bam, it works every time. Right? I mean, in physics, the same way. You know, you roll a ball down a ramp, what's it going to do? It's going to go down the ramp, you know, and fall a certain place every time. And you could predict that. And that's like what we like in science, is to make predictions like he was trying to do with climate change and things like that. So yeah, one of my biology teachers is here, so he's recording this. But
what did you say about biology?
It grows on you.
Literally. So and one thing that I'd like to just kind of throw out to the panel here is I think it feels like right now teaching science, advocating for science is a big responsibility. It's a big responsibility that I think that you guys have and you've taken on for yourselves because you're going person to person and you're instructing people in this method that we call science, of sort of finding the empirical truth by discarding the things that aren't empirical truth. Do you feel that kind of responsibility day to day?
I feel like after the documentary, my job is more terrifying than I thought it was about 2 hours ago. Like, thinking about how the students in my class view science and then view the way the world works and the way it should be and the way I think Bill Nye inspired, I know, me to look at science. And I tend to term it, we have this instant gratification generation. They don't want the process of science. They want the answer now and they want to move on. And I think that's why we are seeing a lack of scientists coming out of our schools, is because they don't want to go through that process. They really just want the answer and to pass the test and to graduate, and that we're not creating scientific thinkers at all. And so I'm terrified a little bit.
And there seem to be a whole lot of sort of kind of well-funded people that can provide these answers that seem to be good enough and acceptable enough. And there's a whole sort of what I would consider to be a not very reputable industry of people, often funded by oil companies and others, who are just sort of, here's an answer, good enough, you know, we can work with that. Do you ever have, I'll go ahead and throw this to you, do you ever have skeptics in your class who possibly give you challenges?
Oh, tons all the time. I know the past couple of years, the biggest thing that I hate hearing asked is, or not being asked, I'm being told, is that the world is flat. I got a couple of students that every day they'll come at me with, world is flat because of this, and I'll just ask them, why do you think that? And try to get a response from them. One of the things that I personally believe is, I probably won't change the mind of somebody who firmly believes something. So if they want to believe that, that's on them, but I will ask them to tell me why, or at least think about it, make sure they have an answer for why they believe that. Because in my mind at least, eventually they'll find a hole that they fought through and they can't answer it. Mm-hmm. And so it's not me telling them, it's them discovering the answer there.
Could you guys just kind of brief me on why anybody would believe that the Earth is flat at this point?
At a conference, and they said they're coming from all around the world to be to that conference. I've seen that bulletin.
All around the world. Is there any? What's the justification for this?
I know there was an NBA player who stated that he believed it, and so, you know, the students look up to certain people, and it's just information that passed on. It might have started out as a joke, and, you know, people just cling to stuff.
Okay, so a thought leader, the point guard for the Boston Celtics, said that, and people who went to Duke, by the way, which is not a great credit to Duke, I should say.
I ignore them. My best friend at work is a climate change denier. He's a science teacher, and I mean, we talk about it, but he does not believe it's happening. And at some point, like you said, I'm not going to change his mind. He's going to listen to the news media that he wants to listen to. He's going to say it's not media because that's what he's choosing to listen to. and I'm never going to convince him. Just like I'm never going to convince a student who believes the earth is flat that it's not. There's a pretty popular viral video, I think, of a teenager doing demonstrations trying to prove why the earth is flat, and I think that's part of why it's caught on, but they're going to believe what they want to believe. All we can do is teach them to think critically about it and hope eventually they change their minds.
And I think that's one of the things that the film kind of, I don't know, sort of Bill Nye's approach to it nowadays is talking to adults about it. And like you saw who he talked to, like they're not going to change their minds whatsoever. Most of his success was when he was talking to younger kids and not telling them, hey, this is this, but showing them, hey, when I do this, this things happen. Why? Let's think about it. So getting them to think about things critically, I think, was the most important part, because it just opens their mind up to new ideas. Not telling them things are this way, but showing them and getting them to question why.
Right, when you get young kids, years ago a kid came to me, I was teaching in high school, and he said, what subject should I teach in high school to really make a difference? And I said, teach elementary science. Because you get the little kids, that's where it all starts. You know, people say that we're here in high school to make them ready for college, to make them scientists and all that stuff. And I don't believe that at all. I don't really care if they become scientists, but I want them to be educated in science. They might be the ones who take their kid because of something we do, like Mr. Moldman there takes his kid for a dinosaur dig interlingua every year. Because of that, maybe they might take their kids to a museum and their kids will be the ones who become the scientists of the future, you know? I mean, you're changing lives, well, in education, you guys took your educational psych. Are there any other teachers out there besides the one I see in there? Yeah, you take those things, the cognitive, the psychomotor, and the affective domains. They say these are the three big things. And so much of our science education focuses on that first thing, cognitive. And that, to me, after 45 years of doing this, is the worst thing we could do. Memorize names for what? Especially in this age when they can look it up in 3 seconds. And something you may have told them 5 years ago, well, wait a minute, they're going to remember that? I don't think so. The psychomotor, do something like light a Bunsen burner. Like, yeah, that's a life skill. Yeah, when's the last time you guys lit a Bunsen burner? But the third one is the affective domain, the attitude. That's what we got to get at. That's how you change those kids. You show them like what Bill Nye did. He showed them that science was fun, right? The key word, fun. Doesn't show up in anything because you can't really test for it. There's no test you can give to show, oh, look at our state scores. The worst thing we've ever done in education, I think, is testing, right? Think about when you have a hobby. Why do you have that hobby? It's fun. Why do you know so much about it? You memorized all the books on it? No, you read it once and it sunk in because you enjoyed it. That's what we've got to do. We see Bill Nye did that for a lot for you. And my generation, I got other things here. My generation went back a little further. Mr. Wizard, Don Herbert. Yeah, and what was so cool about him? He looked like this. I don't dress up for this. This is the way I look every day. I change, I have different clothes, but this is how I look every day. Mr. Wizard, I remember watching him on TV and then going into the kitchen and trying to do what he did. There was no big gimmicks. It was simple. It was fun. It was interesting, right? And then another guy came along, and he talked a lot about him in this film, right? This guy, Carl Sagan, right? Now, some of you are the right age when you were still young when he came on with Cosmos. The second series that came out, there was something about the man, how he presented it. What are your kids going to remember about physics 10 years from now? They're going to remember, what do you remember about physics after all your years, or your high school? What do you remember? The content or the teacher? It's the teacher that makes the difference. If we can make it fun and interesting, like Bill Nye or Carl Sagan or Mr. Wizard, then we got a chance. We really do. And I'm not trying to sell books here. But I got to talk about one last book, and I'll be quiet after that. It's called Teaching as a Subversive Activity, written in 1969. Oh, yeah. I don't remember 68 too well, but I was around 69. Right? And he says the whole purpose of education, this guy Postman, is to have kids have built-in shock-proof crack detectors. How do you know somebody's lying to you? How do you know what's the truth? Isn't that what all this stuff is about? You show them all the evidence, they still don't believe it, you're right. You can't change these people, but maybe you could change the kids, and that's where we are in the trenches with them. And unfortunately, we sometimes get them too late in high school. You know, it's that elementary, which I think is in a really sad state of affairs as far as science education. It costs too much to train someone. It costs too much to run. So that's where we got to do it. We got to bring the fun back in. They're not going to remember the content. They'll remember you. And if you made it fun, they might listen to other people who are bringing up science ideas.
So do you? I think that's such an interesting point, and it's so interesting that we have the. Well, I'm not a scientist, but I'm the Sagan generation, and we got two Bill Nye generations, and then we got the Mr. Wizard generation.
That was very politely done. Yes, but I'm the old guy in the room.
But that gives us an idea.
I'm older than Bill Nye.
That gives us an idea of sort of the scope of time. Is there a new rigidity, or is there a new sort of acceptance of nonsense, of hogwash? Or has this always sort of been baked in? Has it always kind of been the case? Because I think that we do see, I mean, it's chilling to me when we see those kids walking through that nonsense museum. Is there a new kind of rigidity and a difficult way for science to sort of take hold and become a process of critical thought?
I'm not sure any of it's new. I think we just see a lot more of it these days with social media.
Maybe.
I think it's always been around, and it's a lot more pervasive because we're not just getting our local news station, we're also getting everyone else's local news station and the videos and everything that happens. It just makes it harder to combat maybe, but I think it's always been around.
I'd say one other thing too about back when I was in high school and stuff, and elementary school, middle school, I guess, the space race. The space race was so exciting. Right? It was a period of time when everybody, if you've ever watched the movie The Right Stuff, when they launch it, even the news reporters are crying, right? Or Walter Cronkite crying when we got to the moon. I mean, that's not there anymore. We don't have that passion that we once had for science. And it's partly because of, you know, things have changed, times have changed. And I think just the way the whole system is set up, it goes against us. We have to, if you're in your classrooms, you know this, if the kids are laughing, you're learning something. Even if it's only that it's fun to learn something new. And we're not doing that in our schools. It's boring. Why do so many kids become finance majors instead of scientists? Because at least they could sorry about that. At least they can make a lot of money because everything else was boring, you know?
Is there anybody hasn't offended yet? Please just form a line. Yeah.
I think that leads into something that you were talking about a little bit earlier, when you said that we kind of like were taken back at you calling us experts and that kind of thing. And a big part of that kind of leads off what he was saying is, you know, we don't feel like experts. At least we're not treated. I don't know if that's just my opinion on this case, but you know, we're in the classroom 95% of the time. We know our students. I know when one of my students having a bad day, she needs to just, you know, sit in her chair and not be messed with. But if an administrator comes in, I'm doing a bad job just on what they see. So I'm not treated like an expert in my field. So it doesn't feel like I'm an expert. So that's why it's really weird to be called an expert by somebody else.
Well, who else is going out there doing it? Who else is going in there and making that eye contact? Who else is dealing with the challenge every day of how do I engage that kid? You know, it's like you guys are the experts. You're doing. I mean, and I feel an incredible amount of gratitude that you guys are doing this. That you're taking this on yourself. It's a hard job. I'm sure this isn't news to you, but it might be news to some of the people in the audience. It's like it's incredibly difficult work that causes, you know, these three very smart people to strain their brain every day and try to make it happen. So you guys are. Who else is the expert on this? It's you guys.
It's unfortunate that a lot of the people that are making the decisions, like the administrators and stuff, or who's writing the test, the TEKS or whatever, or all these other things, are the ones that are driving it all, whereas the troops that are in the trench, and my hat's off to these two. They're knee deep in kids in their school.
You're in the catbird seat at a private school.
Yeah, really, you know. But I've tried everything for 45 years of this thing. I'll get it right one of these days. I got 7 more years, guys. 7 more. Okay. Yeah. but you know, it should come from the people in the trench up. What should we do to make these kids really interested in learning? And it's not. It's coming down from the top. And what they see up there are test scores and improvements, and I'm going to get reelected, and and how much money am I going to make by selling these test booklets, and how many days do you lose teaching that you have to study for these tests? And is that fun? When was the last time you guys took a test? Yeah.
I have to proctor a test tomorrow, and I'm not looking forward to that.
No, that's a horrible time. Those kids are out there sweating and everything.
It seems like an insoluble problem, but I think that as people of science, there should be no insoluble problem. What is this? Is there a solution? How would we get to that place?
Just biology.
So the solution is you look at it and you see, okay, this is not working, let's do something to fix it. And the problem is that I've noticed looking at education the past couple of years is it's not, hey, how can we fix it? It's how can we spend less money for this problem. Funds are reduced, and we can sit here and talk about how much money needs to go into the education system all day. You've heard it, teachers underpaid. You saw the strikes going on a couple weeks ago in West Virginia. You know, those types of things come up. And that's what everybody's issue is the people who are making decisions are worried about the check that they have to write instead of what is the product that we're getting at, which is our future. The kids are going to be the people that are eventually making a decision, and if they're not educated, then it just creates a train wreck.
Well, and maybe it has created a train wreck.
Maybe that's
what we're
possible,
looking at in some recent events in our country, Trump, are kind of a referendum on education and our ability to think critically and to judge data and judge the bad data and judge the good data. Maybe those chickens are kind of coming home to roost right now.
Well, I think a lot of what we see with testing and a lot of the problems, they're all band-aids to different solutions. And so I feel like testing was a band-aid to the fact that we have teachers in positions who maybe shouldn't be in those positions.
Sure.
So let's test the classes to make sure that these kids are learning.
It provides a floor.
And it provides that level, but the problems are much bigger than testing. They're much bigger than funding. They're much bigger than cell phones or learning. But we just are doing these little band-aid solutions, and I don't know that we've really come up with what the problem is even, and we can't find a solution until we define that problem.
It's a culture problem where nobody wants to be told they're wrong, everybody wants to be right. So we can't have that critical thinking where, hey, you know, it's okay that you felt that, but what did you learn from it? Because everybody wants to be right all the time.
Yeah, and why aren't there enough teachers? Why aren't people going into teaching science? Why do we have unqualified teachers there? Well, it goes back to the funding, right? And how do you make a classroom really exciting and dynamic if you have, you know, a $500 limit for your whole year? Oh, but can you get computers really easily? Yeah, that's another story.
My first year teaching, I taught in inner city Chicago, and chemistry, my classroom was a science classroom because I had a sink. That was basically the gist of it. And when you have bright students in those classes, the research shows you need those students to come back into their neighborhoods to inspire those children to move out. But if this one girl I'm thinking of, is so bright and so intelligent, she's going to go become a doctor because that's what's going to bring her family out of poverty. Going back into the neighborhood and becoming a teacher is not going to bring her family out of poverty. And this neighborhood is Puerto Rican, Mexican. I'm just, you know, a white lady that they don't see themselves in me. There's no relation. So we need a lot more. It's not just like funding for teachers, but we need minorities in education too, as teachers. And we don't have a lot of that, unfortunately, especially in science. That's why I became a physics teacher. I didn't see any female physics teachers. All my physics teachers were men.
Yeah, that's in part why I got my current job. I had the choice between going to a private school and Del Valle, where I'm currently at. And I did a interview at the private school, saw some of the students, and I could not relate with any of the students as far as background, but at Del Valle, I felt like, hey, I grew up as a lower class Hispanic individual, and that's what I'm seeing a lot here. I can relate to some of these students. And one of the things that kind of goes back to funding, but I think it follows the culture as well, kind of coming off what you're saying, a lot of my students, their choices in life, the only thing that they know is, I'm going to graduate because I just need that piece of paper so I can start working. They don't have that. They never had those experiences of going on a field trip and seeing something at NASA or seeing something at a hospital. Actually, I'm actually seeing a lot of, in the career technology area, like a lot of nurses coming up, because that's starting to become more and more something that they're just seeing. Hey, my mom's a nurse and she's doing it, she's making things well, I can do that too, or my uncle did this. But a lot of my students don't have those experiences or can't have those experiences because they're supporting their families. I have students that work to support their families and don't have time to school. They come to my class and all they can do is sleep because they spent the night working until 1 o'clock in the morning. And that shouldn't be the case. Their first goal should be finding experiences so that they know what they want to do, not struggling to get by.
Yeah, the whole piece of paper thing is just really a tough problem I think we have to solve. I remember thinking when I was a kid, our teachers took us into an auditorium and there was a jazz pianist, and we sat at close range and watched the jazz pianist play. None of us kids became jazz pianists, but we were so engaged by the fact that we had felt so much interest, and it just lit up our brains that we saw this person with this process who was so passionate, engaged. And so I really think we benefited so much just from watching an adult, who are the most boring people in the world, having passion and having fun and doing something that even if we didn't quite want to do that, like we felt engaged by it. And I think having teachers who aren't, but having teachers like you guys, I'm going to guess, who are so engaged is, whether or not those kids ever become scientists, they're like, oh, I saw an adult role model who was engaged in life and having fun and truly not just worried about, hitting some sort of abstract score on a teacher's evaluation or something.
I'm seeing a lot of role models. I'm seeing, when I went through UTeach, my program where I got my certification, one of their big pushes was, hey, when you write a question, don't just use your average like Joe or John. Use something that relates to students. I'll say it just to use an example out there, or use a girl's name. Just something to show that, hey, it doesn't always have to be your average white male that's involved in this. I do a project where they have to research a scientist for a couple of days. And I have alongside the list of, your typical scientists that everybody knows their names, I have the list of female scientists and, minority scientists. So they're there, and I try to make opportunities for those students to see them. I think that's a real good push, and at least from my teachers who taught me to try to get that information out there and inspire those students.
Overall, I think there's a lot more females and minorities going into science. I see just in my teaching with bright young women going off, and there's 3 of them working on PhDs now in geology for all whoever girls going into geology, and so there is a change happening, and it's because they have role models that are going back in there and teaching. In our department, I think there are more females in the science department than males. We're a dying species, and that's perfectly fine, and everybody can get excited about that. So I think it is changing. But again, change attitudes and stuff, or it takes a while, but it can happen.
I think I see it changing in science. I also teach engineering, however, though, and I'm not seeing it really change there. I have 2 girls in each of my second-year engineering classes, and that's about where it's been for the past 5 years. And they're not being pushed towards that hands-on. So it's okay for girls to be brainy now, but it's still not okay for them to be hands-on and mechanically oriented. And so I think there's still a lot of room for us to go forward with that.
There's always room, yeah.
I personally struggle integrating current topics a lot. We're held to not just teach the TEKS, but Round Rock has a curriculum that's outlined and the pace that we have to teach content at if I really want my kids to be able to investigate and understand and then pass a test and then pass the class. I'm lucky if I could bring up something that's currently happening. I have some students who will bring it up and we can maybe talk about it for like a couple minutes, but I don't think it's anywhere near where it was when I was in school, where we could talk about these current things that were happening. It makes me sad, but it's hard to break with the saying, oh, well, I'm just not going to teach that because every other teacher in your department's teaching that, and then the scores come back, and it's like, well, why did your kids do so poorly on this? And you have to then say, well, I decided not to teach it, and that doesn't generally go over very well.
And it probably was a topic that would have got the kids really excited, too.
Yeah, well, it's like we look at, we're in the middle of waves right now. I have 5 days to teach waves, and that's including a quiz and a test. And if I want them to investigate, which I did, I had them investigate on yesterday, that's 50 to 60 minutes of my 90-minute lesson for them to play with slinkies. And yes, I let them play with those slinkies because I think that's so important. But now I have to recover that time somewhere else because I let them play for probably twice as long as another teacher might have.
So the whole thing that we're talking about as being this really positive thing, which is the fun part, is sort of like a continual debit against your time that you have to produce tangible, testable results.
I think it's all over the shows designed for like preschool and kindergartner. My son is in love with Sid the Science Kid. And I know it's for like 3 and 4-year-olds, but I think that's where we're seeing it in a lot of these kids. I think, yeah, there probably is a gap for elementary age kids, but I totally showed a Bill Nye episode as part of my engineering curriculum a month ago. So I think that's still happening a little bit.
And as far as the scientists who are well known, one thing that has to be considered is, out of all the scientists that ever existed, you hear of a few of them. Those are the ones who aren't afraid of talking to people. A lot of my friends are engineers and got out of college as engineers and scientists, and they went to work and they're perfectly fine sitting in a lab by themselves, not talking to anybody. That's where they're at home. The thing with like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson, those are people who are charismatic enough to, hey, sit out in front of a crowd and knowledgeable enough at the same time to explain things on a level where somebody who's never taken a class can understand it. So it takes a special kind of person to be able to do that. I think that's why it's like, oh, well, where's the next one? You got to get lucky there.
To have born popularizers. Yeah.
But I also think, too, that the whole media thing is different now than it was before. Before, all you had was TV. And so, therefore, if you put a show on TV, people are going to watch it. You get your ratings, and Bill Nye was popular. Now, I mean, what do the kids really watch? It's their phones. How much of them are really watching television shows, or they're watching movies or playing video games and things like that. So I think the audience has been pulled away from a place where the dissemination could start, like it was with Sagan or Don Herbert or Bill Nye.
I think the kids who go, it seems to me like with the world of YouTube, which is going to become much more popular than any television show, it already is happening, is that kids who are really into it can really take an intensive track into it. But kids who are less likely to be exposed on the first go round in the way that we were when there were 3 channels.
Yeah.
So I think we need to wrap it up because it is a school night and it's almost 10 o'clock, which is alarming. But I really want to thank you guys so much, not just for coming tonight and talking to us, but for all the work that you do every day. We really need you, and we really appreciate it. And I think I can speak on behalf of this audience that we want you to keep up the great work, and we value it every single day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.